The day my mother sold Nova, I was 15. Not 16, not 14. 15 years and 3 months to be exact. I remember because it was the week before my first high school finals, and I'd been holed up in my room, trying to make sense of geometry, with Nova curled under my desk, her warm fur a constant comfort against the chill of our perpetually underheated duplex. My mother, Deborah, was 43 then, though she always looked older, worn down by a life she insisted everyone else had made difficult for her. She walked into my room without knocking, as usual, a forced, brittle smile on her face. Nova, a scruffy terrier mix I'd had since I was 5, lifted her head, tail thumping a hopeful rhythm against the floorboards. Deborah didn't even glance at her. "Camila," she said, her voice dripping with the familiar syrup of self-pity. "I need you to understand something. This is for the best, for all of us." I knew that tone. It was the prelude to every one of her grand pronouncements, every decision that would inevitably benefit only her. My stomach twisted. "What are you talking about?" She held up a crumpled wad of bills. $600. "I found Nova a new home. A really good home. They have a big yard and other dogs. She'll be so happy." The world tilted. $600. For Nova. My best friend, my shadow. The only living creature in that house who ever offered unconditional affection. I looked at the money, then at Nova, who was now slowly rising, sensing the shift in the air. Her ears were perked, her dark eyes fixed on my mother, then on me, confused. "You sold her?" My voice was a whisper, barely audible over the sudden roaring in my ears. Deborah sighed, a long, suffering sound that was meant to elicit sympathy. "Camila, we're barely making ends meet. You know how hard I work. This was the only way. She's a burden, honey. Another mouth to feed." A burden. That word echoed in my head. A cold, hard stone dropped into my chest. Nova, my loyal, loving Nova, was a burden, just like I was. I didn't cry. Not then. The tears were there, a hot sting behind my eyes, but something inside me snapped shut. I just stared at my mother, at the woman who had always used her helplessness as a weapon, a shield, a justification for every selfish act. I remembered her telling my grandmother, Iris, that she just couldn't manage the bills, even as she bought new clothes. Iris, sharp and warm, would just shake her head, a knowing sadness in her eyes. "A woman can turn into the thing that ruined her unless she chooses differently," she'd once told me. Not about Deborah specifically, but about the choices people make. I didn't understand it then, but I was starting to. Later that day, after Nova was gone, after the silence in the duplex became unbearable, Deborah dropped me off at my Uncle Larry's house. He was 52, a quiet man who lived alone in a small, neat house across town. He opened the door, his eyes wide with a mixture of surprise and resignation. He was my mother's older brother, but they'd never been close. He was too practical, too honest, for Deborah's dramatic narratives. "She'll be staying with you for a while," Deborah said, pushing a food stamp card into my hand. "Just until I get back on my feet. You know, with everything." She didn't look at me. She just gave Larry a quick, tight hug, then turned and got back into her beat-up sedan, leaving me on his porch with a small duffel bag and a crushing sense of abandonment. Larry just nodded, his face unreadable. He didn't ask questions. He just led me inside, showed me to a spare room, and left me alone. He was never cruel, but he was distant, emotionally unavailable. He took me in out of some sense of familial obligation, I knew, not out of any real warmth. It was just another confirmation. I was on my own. That night, lying in a strange bed, the silence deafening without Nova's soft snores, I finally let the tears come. But they weren't just tears of grief for my dog. They were tears of rage. Rage at my mother, at her casual cruelty, at her unwavering belief that she was the only one who mattered. She thought I was just another mouth to feed, a burden to be offloaded. She thought I was powerless. I pulled out my cracked phone, scrolling through old photos, until I found one of Nova, Her ears flopped, her tongue lolling out in a goofy grin. My thumb hovered over the delete button. She thought she could just erase me, erase my life, for a paltry $600. She thought I'd just disappear. My finger pressed down. The photo vanished. She thinks I'm just another mouth to feed? I'll show her what I feed on. 3 years passed. 3 years of ramen noodles, stale coffee, and the flickering glow of public library computer screens. I was 18 years and 3 months old now, living in Uncle Larry's quiet, sterile house. He was 55, still distant, still polite, still utterly uninterested in my life beyond ensuring I didn't burn the place down. It suited me. I didn't want questions, didn't want sympathy. I wanted silence and the freedom to work. My days blurred into a relentless cycle. Mornings were spent at the local community college, taking every STEM course I could afford, often under pseudonyms to avoid any paper trail that might lead back to Deborah. Afternoons and evenings were for the library. Their free Wi-Fi was my lifeline. I devoured everything: coding tutorials, market analysis reports, legal documents on property law, venture capital trends. I learned to build, to analyze, to predict. The idea for the app had been simmering since the day Deborah sold Nova. She called Nova a burden, a drain on resources. She called me a burden. But what if the burden wasn't the mouth to feed, but the property that couldn't feed it? What if the real burden was a decaying asset, a house that sucked money dry, a neighbourhood left to rot? My mother's duplex on Wade Street was a perfect example. It was old, neglected, a monument to her inability to manage anything beyond her own immediate desires. I started building a prototype. A real estate valuation app, but not just any app. Mine would predict market hotspots, identify properties ripe for acquisition, and, more importantly, pinpoint those on the brink of collapse. It wasn't about gentrification. It was about leverage, about understanding the hidden value, or lack thereof, in every square foot. It was during an intensive online coding bootcamp that I met Willow Knight. She was 20, a year and 9 months older than me, with bright, curious eyes and a directness that was almost jarring. She saw my code, not my guarded silence. We were paired for a project, and she immediately cut through my defences. "Your algorithms are brutal," she'd said, a grin spreading across her face, like a digital shark. Willow was queer, fiercely loyal, and the first person in years I actually let in, even if just a crack. She became my sounding board, my co-conspirator. While I focused on the intricate back end, the predictive models, the cold, hard data, Willow brought a sleek, intuitive front-end design, making the complex accessible. We refined the app, polished it, named it Apex. Then came the rejections, dozens of them. Emails that started with, "Thank you for your submission," and ended with, "Not a fit for our current portfolio." Investors didn't see the vision. They saw a quiet, intense girl with no network, no pedigree, and an app that seemed almost too precise, too predatory. I'd sit through pitch after pitch, my voice steady, my eyes unblinking, watching their polite smiles turn to dismissive nods. Each rejection was a fresh dose of fuel. They didn't understand. They would. One evening, an email landed in my inbox. Subject: Apex, Investment Inquiry. It was from Jameson Freeman, a venture capitalist known for his sharp eye and unconventional bets. He was 32, relatively young for a VC, and his firm had a reputation for funding disruptive tech. My profile, my relentless pursuit, something about Apex had caught his eye. The meeting was in a high-rise office downtown, a world away from the library. Jameson was lean, impeccably dressed, with an intensity that matched my own. He listened, truly listened, as I walked him through Apex, explaining its predictive power, its potential to revolutionize property investment. He asked smart questions, pushed back on my assumptions, and for the first time, I felt like I was talking to someone who genuinely understood the scope of what I'd built. When I finished, the silence stretched. He leaned back in his chair, studying me. "Impressive, Camila. Very impressive." He paused, then his gaze sharpened. "But I have to ask, why real estate? And why this block specifically? Your data seems heavily weighted towards a very particular, very niche area of the city." My heart hammered, but my face remained impassive. He was talking about Wade Street, the neighborhood where I grew up, the one I'd been secretly mapping and analyzing for years, the one where Deborah still lived, oblivious. I met his gaze, my voice soft, deliberate. "Because some people need to be reminded they don't own everything. Jameson Freeman invested. Not just a little, but enough to make Apex a real company." He didn't press me on my cryptic answer about the specific block, at least not directly. He seemed to understand that some motivations ran deeper than market trends. He became a mentor, a sounding board, but I kept my true intentions close. Willow, of course, knew. She was the only one. With the funding, I was 18 and a half, and the world was finally bending to my will. I moved out of Uncle Larry's house. He was 55 and a half, still as emotionally distant as ever, but he gave me a rare, almost proud nod when I told him I was leaving. I moved into a small, functional apartment near our new office space, a place with good Wi-Fi and a quiet hum of purpose. The first thing I did with the money wasn't to buy a fancy car or a lavish apartment. It was to set up a series of shell corporations. Iron Halo LLC was the primary one, a name chosen for its stark, unyielding imagery. Through these entities, I began to buy. Piece by piece, the properties on Wade Street started changing hands. My algorithms had pinpointed the exact moment of vulnerability for each one, the precise market conditions that made them ripe for acquisition. It was like playing a real-life game of Monopoly, except the stakes were personal. The duplex, my mother's duplex, was the jackpot. It had been in foreclosure proceedings for months, a fact I'd tracked meticulously. Deborah, now 46, was, as usual, oblivious to the deeper currents, only reacting to the immediate crisis. She was too busy chasing after Randall Kent, her latest boyfriend, a mid-30s charmer with slicked back hair and a smile that promised everything and delivered nothing. I'd seen him around the neighborhood, always talking big, always looking for an angle. He had a reputation for getting people involved in sure thing investments that invariably evaporated. My plan for Randall was simple: use his greed against him. I created a new online persona, a rival developer named Kira Vance, all sleek, professional, and ruthless. I used a burner phone and an untraceable email. Kira expressed interest in acquiring properties on Wade Street, specifically targeting those with existing tenants, hinting at a desire to push them out quickly for a redevelopment project. It didn't take long for Randall to bite. He was always looking for a quick buck, and the idea of cutting corners, of making a deal outside the usual channels, appealed to his criminal leanings. He saw Kira as a mark, someone desperate to get rid of tenants, and he offered his services. He claimed he could get tenants to sign away their rights, or even forge documents if necessary for a fee. He spun tales of dispute resolution and lease buyouts. I played along, feigning impatience, pushing him to deliver. "I need these properties cleared, Mr. Kent," I typed as Kira Vance, "and I need it done quietly. No messy evictions, just agreements. Can you facilitate that?" Randall, convinced he was playing me, boasted about his connections, his ability to handle difficult situations. He proposed a scheme. He would approach tenants, offering them a small sum to sign a notice of dispute resolution document, which he would then present as a binding agreement to vacate. The catch was, he'd forged the actual tenancy rights transfer, making it look like the tenants were voluntarily surrendering their claims, when in reality, they were signing away their right to contest any future eviction. He'd pocket a hefty fee for each successful negotiation. It was a classic con, preying on people's trust and ignorance. I knew it was illegal, but I also knew Randall was too sloppy, too arrogant to cover his tracks properly. And I knew Deborah, in her desperation and blind trust in Randall, would fall for it. Sure enough, Randall approached Deborah. He convinced her that by signing this Notice of Dispute Rights with Iron Halo LLC, the legal owner of the duplex, though Deborah didn't know it was May Company, she was protecting herself. He told her it was a way to formalize her tenancy and prevent anyone from bothering her. He probably told her it would scare off other potential buyers. Deborah, always looking for the easy way out, always believing the most convenient lie, signed. She even got a small payment from Randall for it, which he probably told her was compensation for her trouble. The document she signed wasn't a protection. It was a waiver, a legal binding waiver of her right to dispute any future eviction notice from Iron Halo LLC. It meant she couldn't claim she had a valid lease, couldn't argue she wasn't given proper notice. She had, unknowingly, signed away her tenancy rights by cashing in on Randall's fraudulent scheme. The paper trail was clean, legally sound, and entirely her doing. I watched from across the street in my new Tesla, a silent, dark shape against the fading light. The car was a statement, not a luxury. It was a tangible measure of how far I'd come. I saw Deborah on her porch, talking to Valerie Swanson, her gossipy neighbour, a woman in her 40s who always seemed to side with Deborah. Deborah was smiling, a rare, genuine smile. Finally, I heard her say, her voice carrying faintly on the breeze, "We'll be left alone." My eyes, gleaming in the twilight, were fixed on her. She had no idea, not yet. The eviction notice was served a week later. Not by me directly, of course. It came from Iron Halo LLC's legal team, a standard, cold document informing Deborah that her tenancy was terminated, effective in 30 days. It cited the Notice of Dispute Resolution she had signed, confirming her agreement to vacate. The irony was a bitter, satisfying taste in my mouth. It was a Tuesday morning, about 2 weeks after the notice had been delivered, when I decided it was time for my visit. I was still 18 and a half years old to be precise, but the world felt different. Deborah was 46. The age gap felt wider than ever, a chasm of experience and power. I dressed in a crisp, dark suit, my hair pulled back tightly, and slipped on a pair of oversized, dark sunglasses. I drove my Tesla, not to impress, but to signify, to show the chasm. I parked a few houses down from the duplex, then walked up the cracked sidewalk, a clipboard in hand. On it, I'd attached a printout of a generic city permit inspection form. It was a flimsy disguise, but I knew Deborah. She rarely looked beyond the surface, especially if it meant avoiding responsibility. I knocked on the peeling front door. It took a moment, but then it creaked open. Deborah stood there, her hair a mess, wearing a faded housecoat. She squinted at me, her eyes still heavy with sleep, or perhaps something else. She didn't recognize me. Not at first. "Can I help you?" she mumbled, her voice raspy. "Camila Wade," I said, my voice flat, professional. "City permit inspection. Standard compliance check for properties in this zone." I held up the clipboard, my thumb strategically covering my name. She blinked, still not connecting the dots. "Oh, right. Come in, I guess." She stepped aside, pulling the housecoat tighter around her. The inside of the duplex was exactly as I remembered it. Cluttered, a faint smell of stale food and neglect. Nothing had changed. I walked past her, feigning interest in the peeling paint on the walls, the sagging ceiling in the living room. "Just need to confirm a few details regarding the property's current status and any recent changes in occupancy." Deborah waved a dismissive hand. "No changes. Just me. And Randall, sometimes, when he's around." She paused, then frowned. "What kind of compliance check is this exactly? I haven't heard anything from the city." I stopped in the middle of the living room, directly under the water stain on the ceiling that had been there since I was 10. I slowly, deliberately, flicked my sunglasses down, letting them rest on the bridge of my nose. My eyes, cold and unblinking, met hers. Recognition dawned on her face. It started with a flicker, then a widening of her eyes, a sudden, sharp intake of breath. Her mouth dropped open. The colour drained from her face, leaving it pale and splotchy. "Camila," she whispered, the name a strangled gasp. What are you doing here?" Her voice was laced with disbelief, with a dawning horror. She looked at my suit, at the clipboard, at the Tesla visible through the window. The pieces were starting to click into place, slowly, painfully. I only shrugged, letting the silence hang heavy between us. "Standard compliance check." My voice was still flat, devoid of emotion. "Just doing my job." She stumbled back, bumping into a stack of old newspapers. Your job? What are you talking about? You're just a kid." "You're supposed to be with Larry." "Things change," I said, my gaze sweeping over the dilapidated room, lingering on the empty space where Nova's bed used to be. "People grow up. Businesses get built. You own this place," she finally choked out, the realization hitting her like a physical blow. Her eyes darted round the room, then back to me, full of a dawning terror. "Iron Halo, that's you?" I offered a small, humourless smile. "It is." The satisfaction was there, a sharp, potent burst. But it was also emptier than I expected. This wasn't the grand, explosive confrontation I'd imagined for years. It was just a woman, looking old and tired, confronted with the consequences of her own choices. There was no apology, no flicker of remorse in her eyes, just fear, and a desperate scramble for an excuse. "This isn't fair," she suddenly shrieked, her voice rising. You can't do this. I live here." "You signed the papers, Deborah," I said, my voice still calm, a stark contrast to her rising panic. "You agreed to vacate. Randall helped you with that, didn't he?" I watched her face, the way it crumpled at the mention of his name. She was realizing the depth of his betrayal, and by extension, her own foolishness. I turned to leave, walking slowly towards the door. She followed, stumbling, her eyes wide. "Camila, please," she begged, a desperate note entering her voice. "We're family." I paused at the threshold, looking back at her. "Family?" I repeated, the word tasting like ash. "You sold my dog for $600 and dumped me with a food stamp card. That's your definition of family." I stepped out onto the porch, pulling my sunglasses back up. Deborah followed me, her voice still trembling. She squinted at the Tesla, parked like a silent black predator down the street. "That doesn't make you better than me," she whispered, her voice laced with a venomous resentment. "It's just a car." I turned, my hand on the door handle. My gaze was steady, unwavering. "You're right," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, but clear and precise. "It's just a car, but failing to raise me cost a lot more than $600. Then I got in the Tesla and drove away, leaving her standing alone on the porch, the silence of the street finally settling around her. The cease and desist letter arrived at the Iron Halo LLC office a week after my inspection visit. It was from a local tenants' rights group, a standard boilerplate document demanding that we halt all eviction proceedings against Deborah Wade, citing her long-term residency and the unjust nature of the notice. I was still 18 and a half, Deborah still 46. I recognized the language, the emotional appeal. This was Deborah's doing, no doubt, probably spurred on by Valerie Swanson, her gossipy neighbour, who always had an opinion on everyone else's business. I tossed the letter onto Willow's desk. She was 20, hunched over her keyboard, debugging a new feature for Apex. "Looks like your mum's fighting back," Willow said, picking it up, her brow furrowing as she scanned the legalese. "Tenants' rights group." "This could get messy, Camila." "It won't," I said, leaning against the doorframe, my arms crossed. She signed a notice of dispute resolution. Not a lease, not a standard tenancy agreement. Randall's fraud voided any legitimate claim she might have had to begin with. He made her sign away her right to dispute anything related to the property. It's ironclad. Willow looked up, her expression hardening. "You engineered that, didn't you?" "You knew he'd try to pull a fast one, and you let him, knowing it would screw her over." "He's a con artist, Willow," I replied. my voice flat. He would have done it to someone else. He just happened to do it to her, on my dime, for my benefit. She chose to trust him. She chose to sign a document without reading it, without getting legal advice. That's not my fault. But you facilitated it? Willow pressed, her eyes searching mine. You posed as Kira Vance. You nudged him. You used his criminal tendencies to your advantage. Camila, isn't this turning you into something you hated? Manipulative? Deceitful? The question hung in the air, sharp and uncomfortable. It wasn't the first time Willow had challenged me. She was my friend, my only real friend, and her loyalty was fierce, but so was her moral compass. She'd seen the cold, calculating side of me, the one that had built Apex and now dismantled Deborah's life. She sold my dog for $600, Willow, I said, my voice low, the memory still a raw wound. She called me a burden and dumped me like trash. She never once apologized. Not for Nova, not for anything. That says everything. An apology wouldn't fix it, Willow countered, her voice softer now, tinged with a weary sadness. But this isn't fixing you either. It's just making you colder. I walked over to the window, looking out at the city skyline. Justice isn't about warmth, Willow. It's about balance. She took everything from me. Now I'm taking everything from her. And what's left of you after that? She murmured, almost to herself. I ignored her, turning back to the task at hand. I instructed our legal team to respond to the tenants' rights group with a detailed breakdown of the signed document, the voided lease, and Randall's involvement. It was all legal, all above board, meticulously documented. The group, seeing the undeniable paper trail and the clear fraud committed by Randall, had no choice but to drop the case. They sent a formal retraction, stating they could not represent Deborah Wade due to the nature of the signed agreement. The next day, I drove past the duplex. It was late afternoon, the sun casting long shadows. I saw Deborah on her porch talking animatedly to Valerie. Valerie was shaking her head, her arms crossed. Deborah was gesturing wildly, her face red. I knew what they were talking about. The cease and desist had failed. I parked down the street, watching. A few hours later, a process server walked up to the duplex. He taped a notice to Deborah's front door. It wasn't an eviction notice. That had already been served. This was a foreclosure notice. The bank was moving to seize the property. Even without my interference, Deborah's financial mismanagement, compounded by Randall's scams, had finally caught up to her. The legal documents I'd seen in my research had shown the duplex was deep in arrears, a ticking time bomb. My acquisition had merely accelerated the inevitable, ensuring I was the one holding the hammer when it finally exploded. Deborah saw the notice. She tore it off the door, her eyes wide with disbelief. Then she read it. Her face crumpled. She looked around frantically, as if searching for someone to blame, someone to save her. Randall Kent was nowhere to be seen. He had, as I predicted, vanished the moment things started to unravel, leaving her to face the consequences of his and her own actions. Deborah let out a guttural howl, a sound of pure confusion and defeat. She sank to her knees on the porch, the foreclosure notice fluttering from her hand, her shoulders shaking. Valerie, after a moment of stunned silence, hurried over to her, putting a hesitant hand on her back. I watched from the quiet interior of my Tesla, a silent observer to the unravelling of a life. The setting sun cast a long, cold shadow over the duplex, over Deborah, over everything she thought she owned. The day came, eviction day. It was a crisp autumn morning, a little over a month after the foreclosure notice. I was still 18, Deborah still 46. The 30-day period from the initial eviction notice had expired, and the bank's foreclosure process had run its course. Iron Halo LLC, as the primary lien holder, was now taking possession. I arrived early, parking my Tesla a block away, just out of direct sight but close enough to observe everything. The neighbourhood was already buzzing. Neighbours stood on their porches, whispering, pointing. Valerie Swanson was out front of her house, arms crossed, watching the duplex with a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity. Then the trucks pulled up. 2 large moving trucks, followed by a smaller van with a crew of burly men. They were efficient, professional. They had their orders. My orders. The crew foreman approached the duplex, clipboard in hand. He knocked, waited, then, after a moment, used a key provided by the bank's representative, who was also present, a stoic woman in a business suit. The door swung open. Deborah came running out moments later, not in her housecoat this time, but in a stained t-shirt and torn slippers, her hair wild, her face streaked with tears and dirt. She looked like a ghost of the woman who had once held $600 in her hand and called me a burden. "What are you doing?" she shrieked, her voice raw, echoing down the quiet street. "You can't just come in here. This is my home." The foreman, a man with a weary but firm expression, held up a hand. "Ma'am, we have a legal order. This property is under new ownership. You were given ample notice." "No, I wasn't," she screamed, then spotted the bank representative. You can't do this. I'll call the police." But the police were already there, 2 officers observing from their patrol car, ensuring the process was peaceful, legal. They knew the drill. They'd seen it 100 times. The crew started. They moved with practiced efficiency, carrying out furniture, boxes, everything that wasn't bolted down. Deborah's worn sofa, the rickety kitchen table, the chipped ceramic lamps. Each item was a piece of my childhood, now being unceremoniously hauled into the harsh light of day. Deborah screamed, a guttural, desperate sound, as they carted off her old armchair. "Stop! Please! Stop! Where am I supposed to go?" She turned, her eyes scanning the street, desperate, pleading. Her gaze landed on my Tesla. I knew she'd seen me. I knew she recognized the car. I knew she knew I was there. I took a deep breath, then pushed open the door and stepped out. I walked slowly, deliberately, towards the duplex. The street fell silent, all eyes on me. Valerie gasped. The moving crew paused. Deborah's eyes, red and swollen, locked onto mine. "Camila?" she choked out, her voice barely a whisper, then rising to a desperate wail. "Camila, do something, please!" "You can't let them do this. This is my home." She stumbled towards me, her hands outstretched, as if she could physically appeal to me, physically stop the inevitable. Her face was a mask of pleading, of utter defeat, but there was no remorse, no apology for the past, only a desperate plea for salvation from her present. I stopped a few feet from her, my expression unreadable. The autumn wind whipped my hair around my face. I looked at her, truly looked at her, for the first time in years, without the filter of rage. She was just a woman, broken by her own choices, still refusing to take responsibility. "You kept the $600, I said, my voice clear and steady, cutting through the silence. "Now keep your pride." Her outstretched hands dropped, her face contorted, not with sadness, but with a sudden blazing fury. "You think this makes you better?" she shrieked, her voice cracking. "You're just like me." The words hung in the air, a final, poisoned arrow. I didn't flinch. I just turned, got back into my Tesla, and drove away, leaving her screaming on the porch, surrounded by the wreckage of her life. Deborah's words, "You're just like me," echoed in the Tesla as I drove away from the duplex. They clung to me, a sticky, unwelcome residue. I was 18 and a half, and I had just orchestrated the complete downfall of my mother, Deborah, who was 46. I had won. She was broken, publicly humiliated, stripped of everything. So why did her accusation sting? Why did it feel like a whisper of truth rather than a desperate lie? I spent the next few days in a haze of work, burying myself in apex data, in new property acquisitions, but the words kept coming back. "You're just like me." Manipulative, detached, emotionally cold. Was that what I had become? A memory surfaced, unbidden, from years ago. I was 12, sitting on the faded floral couch in Iris's living room. My grandmother Iris was in her early 70s then, sharp but warm, her eyes always seeing more than you wanted them to. She was the last real family I had, the only one who truly saw me, not as a burden, but as Camilla. Deborah had just left, after one of her usual dramatic pronouncements about how hard her life was, how no one understood her burdens. Iris had watched her go, then turned to me. "Camila," she'd said, her voice soft but firm, "you watch your mother. You watch how she lets her bitterness consume her, how she blames everyone else for the choices she makes." She'd paused, stirring her tea. "A woman can turn into the thing that ruined her, honey, unless she chooses differently. You have a good head on your shoulders. Don't let their poison become your blood." I remembered nodding, not fully understanding then. But now, the words hit me with the force of a physical blow. A woman can turn into the thing that ruined her. Had I? Had my rage, my need for control, for revenge, moulded me into a colder, more calculating version of Deborah? I had manipulated Randall, used him as a pawn. I had watched my mother's public breakdown with a chilling lack of empathy. I had felt satisfaction, yes, but also a hollowness. The office felt stifling. Jameson Freeman, my investor, had been distant since the news of the eviction hit the local papers. He'd sent a terse email asking for a meeting, but I'd put him off. He was a mentor, but I knew he saw the ruthlessness, and it unsettled him. Then Willow came. She didn't call, didn't text. She just walked into my office, her face set. She was 20, and her eyes, usually so bright, were clouded with a deep sadness. "I heard," she said, her voice quiet, "about your mum. The eviction." I nodded, waiting. "Camila," she began, then stopped, searching for the words. "You won. You got everything you wanted. She's out. You own the block. You proved you're not a burden. You proved you're powerful." I braced myself. "But you lost me," she finished, her voice breaking slightly. I can't be around this. The way you did it, the way you just watched. It's too much. You're not the Camila I met at boot camp. You're not the one who just wanted to build something amazing. You're just cold." My stomach clenched. Willow, my only confidant, my only real friend. The one person who had seen past my walls. "She deserved it, Willow," I said, my voice tight. "After everything. She deserved it." "Maybe," Willow conceded, her gaze unwavering. "Maybe she did. But you didn't deserve to become this, and I can't watch you do it to yourself anymore." She turned, walked out of my office and out of my life. I didn't try to stop her. What could I say? That she was wrong? That I hadn't changed? The silence she left behind was louder than any accusation. The cost of my success, the cost of my victory. It wasn't just Deborah's broken life. It was Willow's disappointment. It was the echo of Iris's warning. I couldn't fix my mother, but I had definitely cracked part of myself in the process. A few days later, a strange impulse hit me. I drove to a luxury kennel on the outskirts of the city, a place that housed rescue dogs, giving them a second chance. I walked through the rows of kennels, past the barking, the wagging tails, until I saw him. A German Shepherd mix, a little scruffy, with one eye missing, a scar running down the side of his face. He looked like he'd been through hell, but his remaining eye was intelligent, watchful. He reminded me of Nova. He reminded me of myself. I adopted him. I named him Nova too. That night, Nova 2 curled up on the rug beside my bed, his soft snores filling the quiet apartment. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The duplex was empty now, awaiting renovations. Soon, it would be part of my new vision for Wade Street, a thriving tech hub, a symbol of revitalization. Later, under the cloak of night, I drove back to Wade Street. The duplex was dark, a hollow shell, but I could already see the changes. New streetlights I'd funded cast a brighter glow. Some of the other houses on the block, now also owned by Iron Halo LLC, were undergoing renovations. The neighborhood was transforming just as I'd planned. I walked down the street, past Deborah's old duplex. The lights were on inside. Laughter spilled out, warm and genuine. A new family had moved in, one of the first tenants in the revitalised block. A young couple with a small child, happy, intact. For the first time, looking at the vibrant life blooming where my trauma had festered, I felt nothing. No triumph, no satisfaction, no lingering rage, just a profound, unsettling emptiness. The autumn leaves had long since fallen, and now the first chill of winter was in the air. It had been several months since the eviction. I was 19 now, and the block, Wade Street, was unrecognisable. The old duplex, Deborah's duplex, was no longer a monument to neglect. It was the gleaming centrepiece of a new tech hub, its windows reflecting the crisp morning light. Inside, the new family's laughter was a constant, unsettling reminder of what I had destroyed to build. My vision for Wade Street was taking shape, piece by painstaking piece. Apex had been instrumental. My algorithms had identified other properties nearby, undervalued but with potential. Iron Halo LLC had acquired them, and now construction crews were everywhere. Old, crumbling facades were being replaced with modern designs. Small businesses, cafes, and co-working spaces were opening. The neighbourhood was thriving, buzzing with a new kind of energy, a stark contrast to the decay I remembered. Financially, I was more successful than I had ever dared to dream. My bank accounts swelled. Jameson Freeman, my investor, still called occasionally, but his calls were less frequent, more formal. He still saw the potential in Apex, in me, but the warmth, the mentorship, had evaporated. He'd seen the ruthlessness, and it had created a distance I knew I couldn't bridge. He was a businessman, and I was a successful investment, but the personal connection was gone. And Willow. I'd tried to call her a few times, sent a couple of texts, nothing. Her silence was a heavier weight than any argument. She had meant what she said. I had won, but I had lost her. The isolation I'd cultivated for years, the one that had allowed me to focus solely on my goal, now felt like a cage. Nova 2, the one-eyed German Shepherd mix, was my only constant companion. He was loyal, quiet, a warm presence in my otherwise sterile life. He didn't judge. He just existed, a living echo of the one I'd lost, a silent witness to the emptiness that had settled in my chest. One cold afternoon, I drove to the cemetery. It was a place I hadn't visited since I was 12, since Iris had passed away. My grandmother, Iris, had been gone for 7 years now. I found her headstone, simple and weathered. "Hey, Grandma," I said, my voice barely a whisper against the wind. I knelt, tracing the letters of her name. "It's Camila. I did it. I won." I told her everything. About Apex, about Iron Halo LLC, about buying the block, about Randall Kent and the forged papers. I told her about Deborah, about the eviction, about watching her scream on the porch. I told her about the hollow feeling, the satisfaction that had curdled into something else. She called me just like her, I confessed, looking at the cold stone. And Willow. Willow left. She said I was cold. She said I lost her. The wind rustled through the bare branches of the old oak tree above me. I remembered Iris's words, clear as if she were standing beside me. A woman can turn into the thing that ruined her unless she chooses differently. I had chosen. I had chosen revenge. And in doing so, I had become something I hadn't intended. I hadn't become Deborah, not exactly. I wasn't manipulative for self-pity or laziness. I was manipulative for control, for power, for justice. But the detachment, the emotional void, that felt familiar. "I broke the chain, Grandma," I whispered, a tear finally tracing a path down my cheek, the first in years. I broke the cycle of her controlling me, of me being a burden. I'm free, but I'm still wrapped in it, wrapped in this silence. The silence of the cemetery was profound, mirroring the silence in my own life. I had built an empire, brick by brick, code by code, fueled by a rage that had finally burned itself out, leaving only ash. I burned every bridge to build an empire. But sometimes Silence is the only crown revenge gives you.